Hi team, welcome back. In this video, we're going to look at automatic stabilisers with respect to budgetary policy. So you need to understand the stance of budgetary policy, the role of automatic stabilisers in influencing aggregate demand, and the effect of automatic stabilisers on the budget outcome and level of public debt. Okay, so we're going to start here with the stance, very similar to monetary policy, where the government will take on a counter-cyclical stance. What I mean by that is during periods of expansion where the economy is running a little bit hot and above that long-term trend line, the government is going to take on a contractionary stance because they're going to look to reduce aggregate demand, to reduce that fluctuation in the business cycle, to help the business cycle return to that long-term trend. In contrast, where we hit periods of contraction in our economy, in our business cycle, the government are going to take on the counter-cyclical view of an expansionary stance because the government will want to expand the economy to try to reduce that fluctuation and ultimately return to that long-term trend. So the government acts counter-cyclically to the economy at all times because it's ultimately trying to reduce those fluctuations, because we know that when we're close to this long-term trend line, we're in a much better position such that we can achieve the macroeconomic goals. So during an expansionary stance, the government uses automatic and discretionary policies to decrease leakages and increase injections in order to stimulate economic growth. And then the opposite is true in a contractionary stance. The government is going to be able to use its automatic and discretionary policies to increase leakages and decrease injections in order to dampen economic growth. It takes a little bit to get your head around this stuff, guys. Make sure you're writing this down in your notes and you're using symbols and icons to make sense of the two opposing arguments here. For the rest of this video, we're now going to speak exclusively to automatic stabilisers, what they are and how they work. And in the next video, we'll have a look at discretionary stabilisers, what they are and how they work, but keeping in mind that they both come back to this idea of what stance has the government taken with respect to its budget, okay? So a little bit more in terms of the stance is, if we're looking at an expansionary stance, we're generally seeing governments run budget deficits. So if they want to be expansionary, they then need to get themselves to a position where they're increasing their injections and decreasing their leakages. If you think about that with respect to the traditional terminology of budgets, we know that a budget deficit occurs when expenses are greater than revenues, okay? Expenses are injections. If the government is expending money, it's putting money into the economy. It's an injection. And likewise, if the government is incurring revenues, it means that it's being paid. That money is being taken out of the economy. It's a leakage. And so during an expansionary stance, we're going to see a situation where injections are greater than leakages, just like I said in the previous slide, ultimately in order to take on that expansionary nature. In terms of a contraction, it's going to be the opposite. Budget surpluses tend to be accompanied by contractionary stances. So once again, if you've got a budget surplus, your revenue is greater than your expenses, i.e. your leakages are greater than your injections, okay? And that goes hand in hand with this idea of trying to dampen the economy and take on that contractionary stance. So these are really the two outcomes, because it's important when you see the number and you go, right, the budget outcome for the year is X or Y, or positive or negative. You think, okay, well, a government budget deficit is going to be associated with the government trying to expand the economy. They're spending lots of money to stimulate aggregate demand. And the opposite is true. A positive budget outcome, a surplus, is associated with a contractionary stance because the government is taking money out of the economy, because it's trying to reduce aggregate demand, because the economy is running a little bit hot, okay? Okay, so let's talk about automatic stabilisers. Automatic stabilisers are all based on the cyclical components of the budget, okay? When we talk about cyclical components of the budget, we're talking about those changes that are caused by changes in aggregate demand, okay? So the cyclical component of the budget, known as automatic stabilisers, are changes that are going to occur automatically following changes in the level of economic activity. It's exactly what it sounds like, automatic stabiliser. It automatically stabilises the economy irrespective of any type of government intervention. So the government doesn't need to necessarily do anything. It already has, the policies in place such that the economy is automatically going to make changes that manipulate manipulate the injections and the leakages in and out of the economy. And this is all working, guys, to complement whatever stance the government has taken on, okay? So there's two scenarios, right? During an economic contraction or during an economic expansion. That's how automatic stabilizers are going to play out. Now, the good news for you is that if you understand one, you're going to understand the other, because they're the complete opposite of each other. So we'll start with this one here during an economic contraction. In terms of Australia right now, we find ourselves mostly in an economic contraction. Our real GDP is sitting at around 1.5%. It's far too low. So we really are, in terms of the business cycle, in that contractionary phase, and the government's doing everything it can to sort of hit that trough and start to bring it back up towards the long-term trend. So these are your automatic stabilizers. This is how it operates. It starts here. Number one, there's a decrease in output. Okay, and we know that we've got a decrease in economic growth to 1.5%, and that leads to an increase in unemployment. Now, when people become unemployed, two things happen. Number one, individuals earn less income. If you earn less income, your personal income taxes are going to decrease. Okay, if you're not earning as much income, you're not paying as much tax, and that leads to lower government revenue and a decrease in leakages. So there is that decreased leakage that we're looking for in order for the government to take on that expansionary stance that they're trying to achieve here. So that's the first thing that happens. Decrease in output, increase in unemployment, lower income levels leads to a decrease in personal income tax, which represents that decreased leakage. The flip side of that is, as more people become unemployed, more individuals qualify for unemployment benefits, okay? If you employ for unemployment benefits, you're going to start to receive more money. This increases government expenses, and we start to see that increase in injections. Okay, so those two things are happening together. So the first automatic stabilizer is this idea of a reduction in personal income tax, and the second automatic stabilizer is the increase in unemployment benefits. Those two things together lead to a decrease in leakages and an increase in injections. Okay, if we look at this, guys, this is going to lead to a smaller budget surplus or potentially create a budget deficit depending on how much money is in and out, and that is going to lead to an increase in public debt. Now, this is an expansionary stance. It's an expansionary stance in that it is trying to stimulate aggregate demand by taking less money away from people through a reduction in income taxes and trying to increase injections by making sure that people that are unemployed are put on benefits such that they continue to spend. Now, it's not going to fix it. On its own, it's not going to magically fix the contraction that is being experienced in the economy, but it will help to dampen it a little bit, okay? And so all these things are going to happen automatically without the government actually doing anything. So take it like this. You've got your two particular automatic stabilizers. They funnel through to what will likely be a higher budget deficit. And we know that if we have a deficit from previous videos that we then need to borrow money, that's going to lead to an increase in public debt. Okay, guys, that's story number one. You got your head around that, you'll be fine with this next story. Okay, so the second and final story goes in the complete opposite direction. We're going to come at this from the perspective of the economy's running really hot, economic growth is really high, and ultimately, the government's going to look at that and go, we need to take on a counter-cyclical stance. We're going to take on a contractionary stance. We want to reduce economic growth because we understand that if we let it go at this current rate, it's going to be completely unsustainable. So this is the direct opposite story. If you've got an economic expansion, we see an increase in output, and that leads to a decrease in unemployment. Okay? If you've got a decrease in unemployment, two things happen. Number one, people start to earn more money, and if they're earning more money, they're going to be paying higher income taxes. Income taxes represent a leakage. So we're going to start to see an increase in leakages in the economy through higher income taxes. Okay? It's also going to go hand in hand with more government revenue. The second thing that happens is fewer individuals are going to qualify for unemployment benefits. More of us have got jobs, therefore we don't need as many benefits. So unemployment benefits decrease. It leads to lower government expenses and decreased injections. The government is not spending as much money on unemployment benefits. So we've got an increase in leakages and a decrease in injections. From the budget's perspective, we've got an increase in government revenue and a decrease in government expenses. those two things together are going to lead to a higher budget surplus, or alternatively, if we've got a really big deficit, it might ultimately reduce that deficit. The more likely outcome is a higher budget surplus. If you've got a surplus, what do you do with it? You decrease your public debt. You start to use that money to pay back, obviously, the previous debt that you've got. So once again, guys, this is contractionary in nature, and it is designed to dampen aggregate demand. They are your automatic stabilizers. They are not going to fix the economy. They are simply going to complement the discretionary stabilizers that are coming, and they are going to dampen those pretty massive impacts that we would see should they not be there at all. Cool. I hope that makes sense.